Hey there riders, Moto Journo Kris here today, and I am out and about with the XSR700 from Yamaha. This is their neo-retro version of the MT-07, and as you can see here, it's quite a stylish machine. It's kind of done away with the plastics of the MT-07 to a large extent, not entirely. There is still some plastic here, as you'll no doubt see in a number of different areas. However, they've really reduced it down into that neo-retro styling. It's got the nice simple headlight. It is a really fun thing to ride. It's an awesome machine, honestly. That is with a few caveats. It's a fairly basic machine by the standards of 2022. There are no electronics except for ABS on this particular machine, and the basics do extend through to the suspension where there's very little adjustability. There's a nice braking package on this particular bike, but I think it is a machine which, like the MT-07, is going to be suited to someone who wants a larger bike feel, pretty decent performance, whether you're looking at a restricted version like this one or a full power version, and of course someone who is all about really that quite visceral rider experience rather than having lots of electronics to help you. The 270-degree crank parallel twin in this makes it sit somewhere between a fairly normal parallel twin and a V-twin in my mind. It's got a beautiful feel, a beautiful sound, really nice punch as well. It's just a little bit more lively than the traditional parallel twins, which sometimes get described as being a little bit boring. And certainly when we're talking about a 270-degree crank, I don't think that's a fair criticism. The bike handles really well, not overly aggressive, not a slow handler. It's just in that really nice sweet spot where it does everything really well. The suspension side of things, depending on the roads you're riding, I find I can push it hard through the vast majority of conditions. However, you will find the limitations of that suspension, particularly if you're a significantly different weight of rider than me. I'm 75 kilos, so I probably sit about the kind of envisaged range of riders on this bike. But there are conditions where you'll reach the limitations of the suspension. I still think it handles really well. I think it's a great overall package. And at 13.7, I do think it's on the more expensive end of things for a 650 class bike. However, the Neo Retros do carry a little bit of a premium, so you are paying for the styling and I guess, the hipster feel of a machine like this. But at the same time, I do think that it is an exceptional machine that certainly carries its weight against the competition in the segment. It offers something that is much better than the spec sheets would suggest, which I think most people who've ridden an MT-07 or an XSR700 would realize. On spec sheets, by today's standards, they're quite basic. However, the fun you can have on one of these machines is really quite exceptional. Okay, so let's talk brakes. 282mm rotors on the front with those Yamaha calipers, good power. Obviously it's a dual disc brake setup on the front, easy modulation. It isn't a radial master cylinder. It's, again, a more simple brake system. However, I found the feel onto the brakes really nice, good modulation, not crazy bite, really what you'd expect for a road bike. And at the end of the day, it is a well-balanced system for the bike itself. Obviously, having non-adjustable forks, too powerful brake system could certainly cause way too much dive. However, I found using those brakes deep into corners, nice and easy, coming off the brake mid-corner, nice and smooth. It's just a system that works really well. Obviously, you do always have the option to put some bitier pads in. However, for me, I do think that there's kind of a more relaxed overall feel to this bike, and certainly the braking system really does play into that. And this bike does, of course, have ABS as standard, so a little bit of peace of mind. I don't think I ever had it actually come into play. You get a little bit more engine braking on this bike than you would on, I think, some of the parallel twins, especially the bikes which have slipper clutches fitted. For some reason, I felt like this had a bit more engine braking than even the MT-07, and certainly that does help the braking package overall, because you can use the engine braking and downshifting quite actively to help the amount of braking performance. Well-supported forks. I found the forks very hard to fault. It just works for me, but I'm always a rider who finds most of my complaints normally sit at the rear of the bike with the shock. And I would say, while I was happy with the overall handling and suspension of this machine, certainly the rear was the weakest point between the forks and the shock. Okay, so there is a reason why Yamaha have put their CP2 parallel twin in every machine they possibly could try and get it into. We've got the Tenere 700, XSR700, we've got the MT-07. I feel like I'm forgetting something, but perhaps not. And the R7, and Really, it is a super flexible power plant. Obviously, being in the kind of 650 class, I guess I would classify it, you're only getting about 75 horsepower from the full power version. You're getting about 50 horsepower from this restricted version that we get here in Australia for the Lamb segment, which is a little bit more powerful than the A2 35 kilowatt version. I think ours is about 38 kilowatts. The engine itself is an absolute gem. The 270-degree crank gives it a really nice kind of like almost V20 feel to it. It's got a really characterful power delivery. It's nice and punchy through the low to mid range. It does drop off as you get up to the top end, particularly on these restricted versions. They run out of steam, I would say, 150, 160, particularly in 5th and 6th gear. I've actually felt like the engine was a little bit more restrained than in the restricted MT07. However, I guess there's always going to be some slight differences between these machines. That doesn't surprise me at all. Above, 150, 160, it does still pull, but it just doesn't have a lot of strength to that pull. But where you're going to be having your fun on a bike like this, particularly as a new rider, is in the low to mid range. And to me, 1st through 4th, or really 2nd through 4th, this bike, it's punchy, it's fun. You can knock it down through the gears quite aggressively. It's a rewarding machine. It's got a great feeling of putting the power to the ground. And it's why I love the CP2 engine from Yamaha. I just think it's a really, really easy machine and an easy power plant to get the most out of as a rider. And certainly if you're not looking for 100 or 150 horsepower, this is an engine that I'd always be really happy to own. So as I mentioned, the rear shock on this bike is probably the weaker point of the bike because it only has preload adjustability, which for a $13,700 bike here in Australia, I do feel is starting to get to the point where we're starting to expect more. I think the standards have been raised across the board on so many of the bikes, particularly with, there being very competitive pricing on a lot of those 900 machines, including the MT09 and bikes, competitors like the Z900. As a result of that, obviously, the more basic suspension on this does stand out. However, the obvious choice is that you would upgrade to an MT09 or an XSR700 if your expectations are a lot higher than what this bike delivers. If you're a new rider, I think if you're somewhere near to my weight, 75 kilos, you should find this suspension system pretty good. It's quite supple, but it's still sporty enough to have some fun through the twisties and feel nicely supported. Talking about the handling, it's got the Michelin Road 5 tyres. I found them really good in the dry. In the wet, I wasn't getting quite as much feel as I would like, but I do normally prefer a sports touring tyre. You're looking at very standard tyre sizes, so you'll have a huge range of tyres that you can put on a bike like this. We don't get the X Tribute version with the dual purpose tyres here in Australia. That's something more over in Europe, but that's something that you could possibly consider doing if you really wanted that. The Road 5s do have a fairly round profile, so not overly aggressive, and that ties in with the overall handling characteristic of this bike. It's easy to hustle through the corners, it's easy to have a lot of fun through the twisties and get off the bike and really get engaged. However, it's not an overly aggressive handling package. It's not going to take you unawares, and it's by no means a slow handling package. You're not having to fight the bike or anything like that. To me, it's that nice midpoint. You look where you want to go, the bike does it, and it's just a rewarding bike to ride, particularly I would say in that top of the beginner through to the intermediate segment of motorcycles. I've got a full video up on Ergonomics, but I'll give you a very quick look of me on the bike. I'm 180 centimeters, 32-inch inseam, both feet down flat in regular boots, easy reach to those bars, it's quite relaxed. The bars are a little bit taller and a little bit further back than on the MT07. The seat being taller, 835mm seat height, may be an issue for shorter riders, but generally speaking, I think it's a bike which will suit most people, and it's nice and narrow between the legs when you're putting your feet down, and you've got a nice easy grasp onto the tank, and it's quite easy to lock in as well, certainly when you're getting your toes up on those pegs. So overall, I find the Ergonomics very, very inviting. That nice single dash, very easy to read at a glance, and being taller there does make it very easy to see while you're looking up. You just glance down, you can see your speed. You're not having to like crane right down to see what speed you're going. Overall, I really do rate the XSR700. I think it's just as good, perhaps even depending on what you like in a bike, a little bit better than the MT-07. I like the slightly more relaxed feel of the bike. I do think the MT-07 is a little bit more hoony than the XSR700, which is maybe, you know, like a bit more of a gentleman's naked bike, and certainly that's reflected in the Neo Retro styling. It's got this nice leather style seat on it, which I really do think stands out on the bike. That new single LED headlight is a real eye catcher and gets rid of that fairly ugly and very outdated headlight on the previous model. I like to see that. We're also getting LED indicators, and there are new radiator guards, and they've moved where those indicators are. Overall, they've just kind of brought the package together a little bit more, refined it and made it look definitely a little bit more of the Neo to go with the Retro. And as a result, I really rate the bike. Now, just talking very quickly about the beginner side of things, there is a little bit of roughness in the fueling if you are in the lower gears, and you may need to use a little bit of clutch to kind of smooth things out, just because that 270-degree crank, it does have a bit more of a V-twin feel to it. So for a new rider, there is still, I would call it character, but you might as a new rider find that a little bit intimidating. I don't think it's something that would ever stop you from picking up one of these bikes as a new rider. But of course, with all these 650 choices, they are a little bit more intimidating than the little 3 to 400s as a new rider. Something to keep in mind. I think it's a great machine. I think it'll probably have more life. It could be one of those bikes that you keep for a significantly longer amount of time, because obviously you're paying more, but it'll also take you further as a result of just being that bigger bike feel, a little bit more torque than the 3 to 400s, a little bit more power, and a great overall machine. Anyway, that's my thoughts on Yamaha's XSR700. This is the LA or Lambs version, the 22 version, which has been updated slightly, and certainly great machine. If you've got any questions about it, let me know down below in the comments. Let me know what you think of the XSR700. Is it the bike for you? What do you think of the price? What do you think of the loadout? As always, stay safe out there, and I'll be back soon.